One of the big changes in Latin America deals is they're starting to look like New York or London deals. And in the past, you might have seen, depending on which party was coming in, if it was a Chinese party, if it was a Spanish party investing, they would look like perhaps a Chinese deal or a Spanish deal. And that is definitely changing on the significant projects. Obviously, in the Americas, North America, Canada, and the United States, they've been very interested in investments in Mexico and moving south. The other two big investors, I would say, are Spain. And Spanish companies, contractors, builders, other parties have been very active in Latin America for years, obviously, and they continue to be. The biggest new entrant in the market has been China. And China on various fronts, initially from an equipment supply front and various manufacturers from China that were looking to sell product into those countries, began doing business across Latin America. And more recently, the contractors and banks from China that are now looking to do and build very significant infrastructure plants. They've built very large plants, roads, dams, power plants in China, and they're looking to take that knowledge into other parts of the globe. And in this case, some of the countries in Latin America start to look very interesting to Chinese builders and developers and banks, because they sort of, in China, went from a less developed country to a pretty advanced country very quickly in very large projects. And some of the countries in Latin America present similar opportunities for them. China is the biggest trading partner to Brazil, for example. And so they're very active on that front. In Central America, in several countries there, they're also very active. And so we will see more and more development, more and more equipment, and more finance from China on that regard. I think it's very promising for the business that we've been doing and very encouraging, because many of the technologies have been advanced and developed at a better price point by Chinese companies. And so to bring in the developers, the contractors, and banks who are also comfortable with those technologies and those companies is very promising. We recently worked on a deal where it was a developer from the US, manufacturer from China, a contractor from Spain, and there will be additional financing that comes in through China as well. And that deal was structured like a New York deal. So it did add some complexities when you were sitting in a negotiating room with 22 people at one point, and I looked around and I was the only person whose English was my native language. But it was a very surprisingly smooth deal, and I think that the project is going very well. What may be interesting is the bigger shock might actually be for some of those the Chinese companies, for example, to come do business in Latin America or in other places like in the US, where it's different. It's actually much different for them than it is for doing projects for them in China. And we've seen several of those projects in China that have been done, and they can actually do them much quicker, and with probably less buy-in than you would need in locally in Nicaragua, for example, or Costa Rica, for example. So that stuff is changing. There's a little more sensitivity locally in Latin America to use domestic workers, and so you'll see in some countries where they'll require 80% of the workforce to be hired locally, and that's interesting, because many on the Chinese front, they're able to bring in an army of their workers, and that has to change their business model a little, because you can't do that in some of those countries.